This is Steve Smith at WCG Patient Radio. WCG is a company focused on the ethical, safe, and efficient conduct of clinical trials for the benefit of patients with unmet medical needs. We're speaking today with Peter DiBiaso, who is a marathon runner, a triathlete, has climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, is an American living in Paris, and also has Parkinson's disease. He is a consultant to pharmaceutical companies and has a career in pharmaceuticals in the pharmaceutical industry, having worked at Pfizer, Shire, Vertex, and IQVIA. Hello, Peter.
Hello, Steve. Good afternoon from Paris.
You have an interesting life with your work in the dynamic global pharmaceutical industry that works to bring treatments to patients with unmet medical needs, including rare diseases, a subject near and dear to my heart. And you also have a disease which is not rare, for which a cure is still being sought. Tell us about Parkinson's disease and how that impacts your life. I know that Parkinson's disease is known for the way it affects movement, and that you are also a lifelong athlete. There's a lot of things in your life that are going very well and are wonderful, and in the middle of that comes Parkinson's. How did you come to know that you had Parkinson's, and how has it influenced your life?
Yeah, thank you. It was about I'd say a little over 5 years ago where I was, as an avid athlete, as you've pointed out, I was frustrated during my runs that I was stiff and I couldn't quite relax my right ankle. And I was starting to get a very small kind of hand tremor on my right-hand side. So after much recommendations and kind of facing this, I decided to schedule an appointment with a neurologist, which led to several follow-up discussions, which finally led to the performance of a DAT scan, which is another way that they look at indications suggestive of Parkinson's disease. So at the ripe old age of 49, a little over 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's. So certainly went through all the stages of any kind of news like that, and disbelief and frustration. But I'm happy to say that despite the dire predictions and the fear that I had, there's really been, fast forward 5 years, minimal progression. One of the few things that I'm a strong advocate for in terms of treatment and, universally supported by the medical field is athletics and exercise. So that fit very well with my personal life, and I have a feeling that had something to do with it. But I think to this day, really the only thing that's been an impact is the tremor's gotten maybe slightly worse on the right side. Still a little bit shuffling, and every now and then I have mild cognitive issues, but I tell you what, I'm going to blame that on aging, not necessarily Parkinson's disease. But again, I've been blessed with, very little impact and feel very strongly about the ability to manage this disease, not having the disease manage me.
And have you really been able to keep up with the kind of athletics you were doing before? I know you ran marathons, and you also were a triathlete, I believe. You did an Ironman one time.
Yeah, so I've been fortunate to kind of retain what I personally love. I'm signed up for the Paris Marathon, which has been rescheduled from this past April to in November. So I'm scheduled to do marathon number 10 in Paris. So knock on wood, I'll be able to get through that. Certainly I've slowed down, but again, I think I might attribute that to old age, not necessarily Parkinson's as much as I'd like to.
As they say, Parkinson's has a wide variation, but it's something that a lot of people have, and they're perhaps the general public would be surprised to know they're continuing on with their life as it was, especially when, as you mentioned in your case, it's a slow progression.
I think people are surprised, and it is, a lot of folks are uncomfortable. They don't know what the disease really includes, and there's definitely, when you come in from friends, that there's a little bit of awkwardness. They're aware of my situation, and I don't think they quite know what to either expect to say, but I think, despite that challenge, the diagnosis has not really changed much, and I think once people are comfortable with kind of, speaking to me about it, I'm certainly, increasingly comfortable with speaking about the disease and how it's impacted me. So again, I think putting people at ease is another good way to kind of adjust and kind of embrace the new world with Parkinson's.
I know it's helpful if the person who has something can lead the way by showing friends and the people around them that they can ask about it and talk about it. And it helps prevent a person who's been diagnosed from being isolated unnecessarily just because other people are afraid to talk about it. And I've enjoyed knowing that for a lot of other reasons in my contact with people in rare disease communities. But my college roommate also has Parkinson's and also onset very young. So, we still sit around and have a beer occasionally, and like we always did, and we do the same things, and he's doing the same things in life. So it's helped to be able to be in contact with him, not only as we did, but about his Parkinson's too. I think it's just that's something newly diagnosed people probably should know. Your wife, Vicki, also works in the pharmaceutical industry as you do. So it's interesting that you are both in an industry that reaches out to patients, does research on their behalf. Sometimes that industry itself is misunderstood, but people who are in it also have diseases themselves and things they have to cope with in the family. Would you say your approaches as a family to Parkinson's is different because you know so much about clinical research?
Yeah, I've been fortunate to have a great career in the biopharmaceutical industry for over 25 years now. First as representing the sponsor side of the business, more recently representing a CRO. Also having my wife, who has a similar role in industry, has really helped in terms of understanding. And I think that probably the greatest benefit is our knowledge and the ability to kind of navigate the system is quite effective. And again, coming from industry, having a wife and a very supportive partner, we often switch hats from our industry role to our patient role, but it really has made a difference. And like I said, our ability to manage the system, which also kind of strikes the question of some of the challenges of the general public, not necessarily having that same, but I consider myself very fortunate to have both the resources, knowledge, and expertise to really understand how to best treat the conditions and the disease.
Yes, we talk a lot about in our industry and also on this podcast series about the connection between the clinical trial and the patient, and the pharmaceutical companies that run those trials, the importance to them of reaching out to patients in friendly language that non-professionals will understand, so people can find their clinical trials and access the medicines available there. And of course, that helps the company get the clinical trial completed. So you both have such a unique perspective. I wonder if have you yourself been in clinical trials for Parkinson's?
Yeah, again, since the onset of diagnosis, I was able to kind of join and find several studies. I think to date, I've probably participated in about 6 different studies. Some of them were interventional. Others were more longitudinal observation studies sponsored by the Michael J. Fox Foundation. And included in that is also my wife, who's volunteered for many of the healthy volunteer studies. So I have had the benefit of participating in trials. I've also seen some of the frustrating aspects of trials. In almost all cases, despite having a very effective and a very persuasive physician, it was mostly me that raised the opportunity of clinical research as part of participation. So again, I think despite the challenge in the education that we see, sometimes it really does take the individual to initiate these discussions. So again, that's something that you always hear about, but until I experienced it firsthand, certainly shed a new light, really based on exactly my participation in these trials.
Well, running a clinical trial can be very hard, and one of the difficulties I know the pharmaceutical professionals have is how to really connect with the patients and understand what they're going through and design and conduct the trial in a way that helps them. What was hard about participating in a trial from your perspective as a patient?
Yeah, again, I think it was more just the awareness, who to call, how to enroll, the availability of certain trials. One example is, found a great trial that I was excited to participate in, but yet they required a gene profiling before participation. That's not commonly, covered by insurance. That's not, commonly actually performed by many folks unless, has some very unique opportunities. So while I saw the good of clinical trials, I also saw some of the burden patients face today. So again, a real life example of, despite having the wherewithal to join these studies, in many cases, there's still barriers that's put up to kind of challenge the overall recruitment.
Yeah, I think that can't be emphasized enough to companies designing clinical trials, is that patients, even patients like you who are from the industry, and we've heard this from others in the industry too, that they still have trouble getting through to the people who are running the trial, trying to find the patients. And here's a patient trying to find that person, and somehow there's still a difficulty in getting connected. So that's something the industry needs to keep working on. I know one of the hard parts about running a successful clinical trial is recruitment, and you have spent some of your career working on patient recruitment for clinical trials. Tell us about that. Why is it hard, and what are some of the things that could change to make that more easier?
Yeah, it's kind of the bitter irony that my entire career has been focused on, looking at patient recruitment and some of the challenges that's included with that, both at the sponsor and the CRO side of the industry. And despite our best efforts, I think the industry is still very much challenged by recruitment, although it's getting better. I think we break it down in terms of the role of investigative sites as well as investigators are critical. We've seen that just recently with the incidence of the COVID crisis. At the height of it back in March, almost 75% of all investigative sites were unable to actually see patients, which effectively brought research to a grinding halt. So really the role of the sites can't be emphasized enough. That being said, the role of the sponsor is equally important. You touched on it earlier, but I think their obligation is to actually design studies that are clinically relevant and that can actually fit into people's lives. So rather than actually focusing on just the academic or clinical elements of the protocol, actually focusing on the real world elements of a protocol. How does this really fit with someone's daily life? Will they be able to kind of join for the visits? Are they, do they have something as simple as parking at the investigative site so they can, get into the office? So again, I think this all leads up to what I think many folks are referring to as patient centricity, which is really putting the patient in the middle of the clinical research enterprise. And I think we're starting to see the benefit of that. That was once a rare approach. I think we're seeing it now much more commonplace. So again, I think the sponsors have really embraced working with patients and patient groups, but there's still many challenges to be had.
Yes, the patients are have long been tired of all the time they have to spend in waiting rooms, for example, when they go in for one of their clinical trial visits. They may have to be seen by a doctor and then wait for a scan or a test and then go back to another doctor. And a lot of the day is spent in the waiting room, some patients report. And then with COVID, we've heard reports that patients go in with their caregiver and find out, well, the caregiver can't go into the hospital now because they only let in the required people. Plus, there's nowhere else to go while they wait for hours for the patient to come out, because at least there was a time when Starbucks were closed and other things. Some of that's loosening up. But this is all the kind of thing that sponsors, if they can get ahead of that and communicate, they could warn people about what to expect and smooth the path. And you mentioned work. I mean, there are a lot of people who can't get off of work to go into those visits. But if trials are designed so people can go to them in off hours, then we could start having people with hourly working schedules, daily bus drivers and so forth, coming into clinical trials, which will help us with diversity and inclusion. One of the kinds of organizations that helps patients and helps the sponsors too are the patient advocacy groups. Can you talk about patient advocacy groups as a form of support for you?
Sure. Both, actually, my wife and I, almost immediately after diagnosis, like a lot of people, just searched as far and wide as we could in terms of information. And certainly the greatest common kind of finding was Michael J. Fox Foundation has really led the charge in terms of spurring research. So we were very fortunate at the outset to get involved with Michael J. Fox. Started off with a number of opportunities with Team Fox, which was raising funds through everything from New York City Marathon to climbing on mountains, as we talked about earlier. But soon thereafter learned there's so much more that the Fox Foundation does, including legislative advocacy. So I was also selected as a legislative advocate, where once a year we all go up to the Hill and really speak with Congress, whether that's securing funding, providing a level of awareness of the disease, looking at other challenges. So advocacy, awareness. We've even been involved with looking at what Fox uses called the Fox Trial Finder, which is actually a tool used by Fox in conjunction with others that actually helps track patients and healthy volunteers and makes it much easier to navigate those opportunities that we talked about earlier. So really is a multidisciplinary effort, and the Fox Foundation, I think, has really been great leaders in the industry, and there's plenty more as well.
Yes, the Michael J. Fox Foundation has an astounding and wonderful array of things they offer patients locally and nationally and so forth, and internationally, that just address so many of the different kinds of needs of patients, all the way from, like you said, talking to legislators on the Hill about what lawmakers could do to help the situation, and just families at home wondering, well, how do I support the family now that we have this to deal with? Especially newer families are going to benefit from that. What about the legislative advocacy? What are some of the things that legislators can do?
Yeah, I think certainly everyone always goes to funding. So funding the NIH and a lot of the academic and research work that goes out of that organization is absolutely critical. But there's other efforts as well. I think despite all that we're learning and starting to know about Parkinson's, there still isn't a definitive registry to actually accurately determine diagnosis of the population. So despite all the efforts that we've had, we still don't know how many patients are truly diagnosed with Parkinson's. So again, those are just a few small examples of the role of Congress, along with the advocacy of other organizations and groups.
Yes. That's very important, to build awareness that way, and that there's an opportunity, but somebody has to do something about those things. And you mentioned Fox Trial Finder. I know they use CenterWatch iConnect increasingly for that, which is a very easy way to find clinical trials for whatever disease you have. And that's one of the biggest complaints I hear from patients about clinical trials, is the difficulty in finding them, as you originally talked about. So this is an online tool that Michael J. Fox Foundation is using very effectively. What about, tell us, we have just a minute or so left, what is it like to climb Mount Kilimanjaro?
It was pretty incredible. I have to say that it was something that my wife and I tackled together, and at 19,000 plus feet, it was quite an experience. And we actually, there was a team of 6 of us, and 2 of us actually had Parkinson's. So it was both an emotional and kind of physical exhilaration in terms of what we did. But very happy to have done it, very happy to have finished it, and very happy to probably not do it again. But no, it's just an absolutely rewarding experience. And more importantly, we raised significant funds, including my family helped to the true team effort in raising those funds. And it's awfully nice when you know that those are going directly towards something that will impact all of our lives. So I feel that I'm blessed, and it's been very fortunate to have the support of others.
How long does that take to climb the mountain?
It took about 8 days, 6 days to go up, 2 days to come down. So most of it, thankfully it wasn't a significant physical challenge, at least in terms of the technical aspects of climbing. There wasn't ropes and all that, but it was, in terms of altitude, probably the greatest challenge of actually making it up and down Kilimanjaro. But of course, we finished with a nice safari afterwards, so we're, again, very lucky and actually having a little fun as well as doing some good.
Well, that sounds like really good times. And I'm sorry that we're out of time right now, Peter, but thank you so much for talking to us about all of this, your wonderful life, the role of Parkinson's in it, and your wonderful family.
Well, thank you very much. And my closing word is just everybody can have a role, and everybody should learn how to participate. It's not limited to patients diagnosed with the disease. It's something all of us can do.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Thanks, Peter. We've been speaking today with Peter DiBiaso, a pharmaceutical industry professional, an athlete, and a person living with Parkinson's disease. This is Steve Smith at WCG Patient Radio. Special thanks to our executive producer, Lauren Osmore, and production team, Isabel Andresen, Roxana Guilford-Blake, and technical director David Fogel, and head of studio, Amy Hutnick. Goodbye, everybody.